While Black Sabbath was busy inventing heavy metal, the people around them were busy figuring out how to steal it. Four working class kids from Birmingham, England, including a guitarist who lost the tips of two of his fingers in a factory accident, a bassist who wrote poetry, a drummer who suffered from crippling anxiety, and a singer who had no idea what publishing rights were. They created the heaviest, darkest, most influential body of music in rock history. And then they handed the business side to people who understood exactly what they had and were determined to take as much of it as possible. Let's go back to the California Jam in April of 1974. There's 300,000 people at the Ontario Motor Speedway in California, and it was one of the biggest rock concerts in history to that point. Black Sabbath shared the bill with Deep Purple and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, as well as others. Well, when it was over, their manager gave each member of the band $1,000, put them on a plane home in economy class, and kept the rest of what turned out to be a $250,000 payday. The band found out years later, and that's not an accident. That's a system. So today I want to walk you through exactly how that system worked, who built it, how it ran, what it cost, and how the legal fallout from it literally shaped the sound of one of the greatest albums they ever made, Sabotage. This is the story of how the architects of heavy metal got played and how even in losing, they created something that outlasted every one of the people who tried to rob them. Part one is the first manager. His name was Jim Simpson. So to understand the whole story, you'd have to start at the beginning of Black Sabbath in Birmingham in 1968 at a jazz and blues club called Henry's Blues House, running out of the Crown Hotel on Station Street. Jim Simpson was the man who ran it. He was a trumpet player, a blues promoter, and a local music industry figure. And he was the first person to put Ozzy Osbourne on a stage in that scene. He managed the band when they were still called Earth, and he helped them change their name to Black Sabbath and guided them through the recording of their first two albums, the self-titled Black Sabbath, which was from 1970 in February, and Paranoid, which came out in September of that same year of 1970. Paranoid went on to #1 in the UK albums chart, and almost overnight, the band was one of the biggest rock acts in the world. And that's exactly when things started to go sideways. A band from basically nowhere had suddenly become enormous, and everyone wanted a piece, including people with far more sophisticated business machinery than a Birmingham jazz promoter. Simpson, by his own admission in later years, he was out of his depth at the global level with the band, and Ozzy later described him as overwhelmed. The band felt he had been the right man to get them started, but not the right man for the international scale that they had reached. Existing contracts weren't being renegotiated after their breakthrough, so Black Sabbath was still playing gigs for pre-Paranoid fees, while lesser acts earned more money. And that frustration left them vulnerable. And into that vulnerability walked a man with a very polished pitch. Part two, enter Patrick Meehan. Now, Patrick Meehan Jr., he was a young and already, he knew how this business worked. His father, Meehan Sr., was a former stuntman, and he was best known from the TV series Danger Man. And he'd briefly roadied for Gene Vincent before breaking into management alongside Don Arden, handling acts including the Small Faces and the Animals. Patrick Meehan Jr. had apprenticed in that same world, serving as a former assistant to Don Arden, the self-styled Mr. Big of British rock management, known for his connections and ruthlessness. Don Arden also is Sharon Osbourne's father, for those that don't know. Arden himself had tried first approaching the band directly, and he came on way too strong, which spooked them. Then Wilf Pine appeared. He was smoother, calmer, and he was saying all the right things. And what the band didn't know was that Wilf Pine and Patrick Meehan Jr. came directly from Don Arden's orbit, and that the two of them had already co-founded Worldwide Artists together. They signed with Meehan and Pine's company and Worldwide Artists around 1970 or 71. For a while, Meehan delivered global tours, bigger markets, and real infrastructure. He even listed Worldwide Artists on the London Stock Exchange, powered by Sabbath's success. So the band went from struggling Birmingham lads to international rock stars. And while doing all that, Meehan was building a financial structure that ensured almost none of it belonged to the band. Part 3, the machinery of control. So here's how it worked. And this playbook wasn't unique to Black Sabbath. Don't get me wrong. The key was asset ownership. Houses, cars, and other signs of success were put in companies controlled by management. On paper, the band members owned nothing. Publishing rights were equally, basically out of the picture. These 4 lads, they knew how to write riffs and lyrics. They didn't really understand royalties, audits, or the long-term value of their catalog. Money flow was controlled by Meehan Jr. Straight answers about earnings were rare. And as Ozzy said, Patrick Meehan never gave you a straight answer when you asked him how much dough you were making. Geezer Butler was blunter. He said, "We felt like we were being ripped off." Now, the California Jam made it concrete. After the show, Meehan handed out $1,000 to each member, and years later, they learned the true fee. Gentle Giant, who was a band that shared the management under Worldwide Artists, they grew suspicious of their management. Derek Schulman, who was in the band, he dug into the accounts and he alerted Sabbath. The scales fell from their eyes, and shortly afterwards, Black Sabbath moved to terminate their contract with Worldwide Artists. Meehan responded by suing them. Part 4, The Writ, how a legal battle became a masterpiece. So the band tried to fire their manager while their manager tried to freeze them, and they were simultaneously trying to make a record. Sessions for their 6th studio album began in February of 1975 at Morgan Studios. They dragged on for months, not because the music was difficult to write or record, but because lawyers kept showing up. Geezer Butler even said, "We used to turn up at the studio to write a song, and there would be like 3 lawyers waiting for us." Tony Iommi even described it as probably the only album we ever made with lawyers in the studio. They called the album Sabotage for a reason. The anger fueled the music. Hole in the Sky, oh my God, what a great song. It kicks off with maximum volume and a screamed attack and a joke delivered by producer Mike Butcher, although the fury behind it belonged to the whole band. Megalomania is nearly 10 minutes of epic paranoia and betrayal. And then there's The Writ, one of the few Sabbath tracks where Ozzy wrote most of the lyrics. In his memoir, I Am Ozzy, he said it felt like therapy. All the rage toward Meehan poured out. Lyrics like, "Are you Satan? Are you man? And you bought and sold me with your lying words." Those hit hard. The title came from the literal writs being served in the studio by the lawyers. And the closing line, "Everything is going to work out fine," it carries extra weight. Part 5, the settlements and its price. Black Sabbath eventually won their freedom, but it came at a steep cost. To settle, they paid an undisclosed sum and relinquished significant rights to the publishing and catalog of their first 5 landmark albums. Those records, the ones that invented heavy metal, continued to generate money for others. The settlement nearly bankrupted them financially, and its effects lingered for years. They tried self-management, and then, remarkably, they ended up bringing in Don Arden in 1976. Jim Simpson also pursued legal claims against them and received a settlement of around £7,500 from the band, and Meehan received about £27,500 as well. Now, Meehan continued to profit from compilations of the early material. Part 6, what it means. Black Sabbath eventually came back. The Ronnie James Dio era, Heaven and Hell, The Reunion, the album 13, a final tour that ended in Birmingham in February 2017 in the city where they started, in front of their own people. But here's the thing that never gets said loudly enough. 4 working class lads from Birmingham who knew nothing about contracts, publishing rights, or the machinery of the music industry, they created something so significant that the people around them immediately understood its value and spent the better part of a decade finding ways to extract that value and money for themselves while the band was too chemically impaired, too legally outgunned, and too fundamentally trusting to stop it. The drugs were not incidental to this story. They were, to some degree, part of the system. A band that is fried on cocaine and alcohol at the California Jam is not scrutinizing the accounting. A band that is exhausted and paranoid from years of touring and substance abuse is not in the best position to read legal documents or challenge management. The lifestyle and the exploitation reinforced each other. Sabbath eventually learned that. And by the time they made Sabotage, they understood exactly what had been done to them. The album is the document of the understanding, the anger of men who had finally figured out the game, even though by that point, the most expensive pieces were already gone. What they couldn't be robbed of was the music. Paranoid is still Paranoid. Iron Man is still Iron Man. And War Pigs is still freaking awesome. Symptom of the Universe, The Writ, and Megalomania remain exactly what they were in 1975, records of 4 people under siege making something extraordinary out of it. That's what lasts. Not the contracts, not the settlements, not the compilations. Meehan kept selling the music. So tell me in the comments, did you know the full scope of what happened in Sabbath and what they went through? And if you want me to go deeper into the Don Arden era or what the publishing settlement actually meant long term, just say the word. There's a lot more story here than what I told you, but you got a lot of it today. So subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you on the next one.